Can you believe a black teenager with no legal background could turn the tables on a seasoned lawyer and a harsh judge? Stay until the end to witness this incredible journey. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories like this. Now, let's dive into Jordan Carter's emotional fight for justice. The courtroom hummed with faint whispers and the occasional rustle of papers. A cold, clinical light bathed the room, bouncing off the polished wooden benches and casting sharp shadows on the faces of the attendees. Every seat was occupied, and every eye was fixed on the center stage. A battle was about to unfold. Sitting high on his bench was Judge Reynolds, a man whose reputation for strictness and sharp judgments preceded him. His icy demeanor and unyielding gaze often left those before him scrambling for composure. He scanned the room, his expression as sharp as the gavel in his hand. Suddenly, the heavy courtroom doors creaked open, and the whispers hushed. All heads turned to see a teenager step inside. Jordan Carter, a 17-year-old black boy, clutched a worn briefcase in one hand while his other nervously adjusted an oversized blazer that hung awkwardly on his slim frame. His sneakers squeaked softly against the floor as he walked to the defense table. Murmurs rippled through the room, not just of curiosity, but of quiet disdain. Some spectators exchanged knowing glances, others whispered under their breath, "What's he doing here?" Judge Reynolds raised an eyebrow, his lips curling into a faint, condescending smile. "This isn't the gymnasium," he quipped, his voice cutting through the silence. "Are you sure you're not lost on your way to basketball practice?" The room erupted into soft laughter, led by Franklin Moore, the opposing attorney, whose smirk carried the weight of dismissal. But Jordan didn't falter. He paused, straightened his shoulders, and looked directly at the judge. His voice, though young, was steady and firm. "No, Your Honor," he replied. "I'm here to defend my mother." The courtroom fell silent as every gaze locked on Jordan. For a moment, time seemed to stand still, the weight of his words hanging heavily in the air. But Jordan wasn't always this bold. To truly understand why he stood here today, you have to go back to the struggles he and his mother endured that led them to this very moment. Jordan Carter lived with his mother, Angela Carter, in a neighborhood that seemed forgotten by time. The streets were cracked, the homes weathered and leaning into one another, as if they too bore the weight of their residents' struggles. Life wasn't kind to families like theirs, especially to a black woman raising her son alone. Angela worked tirelessly as a cleaner, taking on extra shifts whenever she could, just to scrape together enough for rent and food. Despite the hardships, Angela had always managed to make their tiny house a home. It wasn't much, a few rooms with peeling paint and a leaky faucet, but it was a place filled with warmth, laughter, and the hope that tomorrow might be a little better. She encouraged Jordan to study hard, reminding him every day that education was his way out of the cycle of poverty. One afternoon, as Angela returned home after another grueling shift, she noticed a folded piece of paper wedged under their door. Wiping the sweat from her brow, she picked it up and unfolded it. Her face fell. It was an eviction notice. The words printed on the page felt cold and unforgiving. "They're saying I owe back rent," she murmured, her voice trembling. "But I've paid. I know I've paid." Jordan, sitting at the kitchen table with his school books, immediately sensed something was wrong. He stood up and took the paper from her hands, scanning it carefully. The more he read, the deeper his brow furrowed. "Mom, this doesn't add up," he said firmly. "Something's wrong here." Angela let out a tired sigh, sinking into the nearest chair. Her hands shook as she tried to hold herself together. "You don't understand, Jordan," she whispered. "People like us, we don't win. They'll find a way to take everything, no matter what we do." Jordan stared at her, his heart aching. His mother, the strongest person he knew, looked defeated. Her words lingered in the air, heavy with resignation. But for Jordan, they didn't just signal hopelessness. They ignited something inside him. He clenched the paper tightly, determination flickering in his eyes. If no one else would fight for their family, he would. He didn't know how, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let them lose their home without a fight. Angela's words weighed heavily on Jordan's mind. As the evening wore on, he sat quietly at the kitchen table, the eviction notice still clenched in his hand. The sound of his mother moving around the small house, her steps slower than usual, echoed faintly. Jordan couldn't shake the image of her sitting there earlier, her hands trembling, her voice breaking. She had always been his rock, working tirelessly to give him a better future. Now she looked broken, resigned to a fate she didn't deserve. Later that night, as Angela sat on the couch staring blankly at the faded wallpaper, Jordan approached her. "Mom," he said softly, sitting down beside her. "We can't just let this happen. You've done everything for me. Now it's my turn to do something for you." Angela shook her head, her voice heavy with exhaustion and doubt. "Jordan, you're just a boy," she said. "This is bigger than us. They've got lawyers, contracts, power. We can't fight them." "But what if we can?" Jordan asked, his voice trembling slightly but full of conviction. "What if they're wrong? That notice doesn't make sense. There has to be something we can do." Angela sighed deeply, tears welling up in her eyes. "Even if we could afford a lawyer, Jordan, it wouldn't matter. These people like the landlord, they always win. You can't fight the system." Jordan leaned forward, his hands gripping his knees. "Mom, I know we don't have money for a lawyer, but what if I did it? What if I represented you?" Angela stared at him, stunned. "Jordan, that's impossible," she said, her voice cracking. "You've never studied law. You don't know how to." "I can learn," Jordan interrupted, his voice steady now. "You've always told me to work hard, to never give up. Isn't that what you've done your whole life? I can't just sit here and watch them take everything from us. I have to try." For a long moment, the room was silent, except for the hum of the old refrigerator in the corner. Angela looked at her son, his face a mix of determination and fear, and saw in him the strength she thought had been lost. She reached out, placing her hand over his. "Jordan," she whispered, tears streaming down her face, "if you think you can do this, I'll stand with you. Always." Jordan nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know where to start, but he knew he had to start somewhere. That night, as his mother slept, Jordan opened his laptop and began searching. Terms like tenant rights, eviction laws, and legal defenses filled the screen. The world of law was overwhelming, but Jordan pushed through, fueled by love for his mother and a desperate need to protect their home. The days after Jordan's decision were filled with sleepless nights and relentless determination. Every evening, he cleared the kitchen table, now cluttered with borrowed law books, printouts, and his neatly handwritten notes. The flickering kitchen light cast shadows across his face, but Jordan barely noticed. His eyes remained focused on the pages in front of him, his mind racing to understand the dense language of the law. Angela often watched quietly from the doorway, her heart a mix of pride and worry. She wanted to help, but there was little she could do except offer silent support. One evening, she stood for a moment longer than usual, her gaze lingering on her son. His shoulders were slouched, exhaustion clear in his posture, yet there was something unyielding in the way he pressed forward. She finally spoke, her voice soft but firm. "Jordan," she said, "you don't have to do this alone. You've done so much already." Jordan looked up, his eyes tired but determined. "Mom, if I don't, who will?" he replied. "They're counting on us giving up. But we won't, not this time." Late one night, as Jordan combed through a housing rights guide, a phrase caught his eye. "All eviction notices must be notarized by a valid practicing notary public to be legally enforceable." His heart skipped a beat. He grabbed the eviction notice pinned to the wall and scanned it. There it was, a signature scribbled at the bottom. But something about it seemed strange. He quickly typed the notary's name into his laptop, fingers trembling with urgency. After an hour of digging, he found what he was looking for. The notary listed on the document had retired 2 years before the notice was issued. Jordan's pulse quickened as realization set in. This wasn't just a mistake, it was fraud, plain and simple. Leaning back in his chair, he stared at the document, his mind racing. His exhaustion vanished, replaced by a surge of adrenaline. This could be the break they needed, but it also meant he had to prepare harder than ever. The landlord's lawyer would fight to discredit him, and he couldn't afford to falter. The following days were consumed with preparation. Jordan turned the small living room into a makeshift courtroom. Standing in front of a mirror, he practiced his arguments relentlessly, imagining every possible question the opposing lawyer might throw at him. With each session, his voice grew stronger, his words more precise. He didn't just want to know the law, he wanted to own it. Angela would occasionally peek in, a small smile tugging at her lips as she watched him rehearse. One evening, as he flipped through his notes, she sat beside him and placed a gentle hand on his. "Jordan," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "no matter what happens, I want you to know I'm proud of you. You've already done more than I ever thought possible." Jordan looked at her, his expression softening for a moment. "Mom," he replied, "I'm not just doing this for us. If we let them get away with this, they'll do it to someone else. I can't let that happen." The night before the hearing, Jordan stayed up late, poring over every detail one last time. The kitchen table was covered with neatly arranged documents, and his oversized blazer hung on the back of his chair. Angela entered the room quietly, placing a plate of food next to him. "You need to eat, Jordan," she said gently. He gave her a small, grateful smile. "Thanks, Mom," he said, but he didn't touch the plate. Instead, he returned to his notes, flipping through pages with practiced precision. As Angela watched him, her chest tightened with both pride and fear. She knew the odds were stacked against them, but for the first time in weeks, a small flicker of hope stirred in her heart. "Get some rest," she said softly. "You've done everything you can." Jordan looked up, his eyes unwavering. "Not yet," he replied. "Just a little more." The next morning, Jordan stood in front of the courthouse, clutching his binder tightly. His oversized blazer didn't fit quite right, but the determination in his eyes overshadowed everything else. It was time to face the system head-on. The room grew quiet as Jordan Carter stood at the defendant's table, gripping his binder tightly. His oversized blazer still hung awkwardly on his slim frame, but his posture was steady, his gaze unwavering. The weight of the moment pressed on him, yet he pushed through the tension in the room. "Your Honor," Jordan began, his voice steady, though he felt the eyes of the entire courtroom on him. "Today, I am here to prove that my family's eviction was not only unjust but also in violation of the law. I will present evidence to show that the landlord acted improperly and in doing so caused harm that could have been avoided." Judge Reynolds arched an eyebrow, his expression skeptical. The judge's sharp eyes bored into him, as if daring the young man to make his case. Before Jordan could continue, the landlord's attorney, Franklin Moore, leaned back in his chair, his smirk audible in his tone. "Well, isn't this interesting?" Moore said loudly, drawing amused glances from the gallery. "Tell me, young man, where exactly did you learn all of this? Was it a crash course on YouTube? Or perhaps you Googled how to be a lawyer in 5 easy steps last night?" The courtroom erupted in scattered laughter, but Jordan didn't falter. He paused, inhaled deeply, and looked directly at Moore. "I didn't learn this from YouTube," Jordan replied, his voice calm but firm. "I learned it by studying the same laws that are supposed to protect all of us. And if you'll allow me, I'll show this court how those laws apply to this case." Moore's smirk faltered slightly, and Judge Reynolds leaned forward, intrigued despite himself. "Proceed," the judge said, his tone neutral but his curiosity evident. Jordan opened his binder, his hands no longer trembling, and began laying out the sequence of events that led to his family's eviction. His words were measured, his evidence meticulously organized. Though his journey had been filled with uncertainty, in this moment, his determination shone through. As Jordan continued his presentation, his voice growing steadier with each word, his mind drifted briefly to the long nights that had brought him to this moment. He remembered the night he'd found it, a single detail that changed everything. The eviction notice, with its illegible notary signature, had been pinned to the wall for weeks, but something about it nagged at him. One evening, while combing through housing laws, he stumbled upon the regulation. Eviction notices must be notarized by a practicing notary public. His heart raced as he grabbed the document, comparing it to records he had dug up online. There it was. The listed notary had retired 2 years before the notice was issued. Jordan leaned back, his mind racing with equal parts relief and disbelief. He knew he had found their key piece of evidence, but he also knew it wouldn't be enough unless he could build a solid case around it. That moment had solidified his resolve. Later that night, Angela had stepped into the kitchen, watching as Jordan scribbled notes furiously into his binder. She placed a hand on his shoulder, her voice soft. "Jordan," she said, "I'm proud of you, but you don't have to do this alone." Jordan looked up, his eyes steady despite his exhaustion. "Mom," he replied, "I have to. If I don't do this, who will?" Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "Then show them what you've got," she whispered. Now, standing in the courtroom, Jordan realized that every sleepless hour, every note he'd taken, and every moment of doubt had led him here. He turned to face Franklin Moore, his confidence unwavering. The courtroom was silent, save for the faint shuffle of papers and the occasional cough. Jordan Carter stood firm at the defense table, his binder open in front of him. Despite the oversized blazer hanging loosely on his frame and the seasoned professionals surrounding him, his composure commanded attention. His steady voice and methodical presentation had made the room pause. But Franklin Moore, the landlord's confident attorney, wasn't about to let a teenager take the upper hand. Moore rose slowly from his seat, adjusting the cuffs of his pristine suit. His every movement exuded practiced authority, a stark contrast to Jordan's youthful energy. Taking a deliberate step toward the center of the courtroom, he addressed the judge, but made sure his words were aimed squarely at Jordan. "Well, Mr. Carter," Moore began, his tone dripping with condescension, "that was quite an impressive recital of facts for someone who has, zero legal training. Truly commendable." He chuckled lightly, the sound echoing in the still room. A few spectators smirked, and a faint murmur of amusement rippled through the gallery. Moore clasped his hands behind his back, pacing slowly. "But let's see how well you really understand the law you're so confidently quoting," he continued, flipping open a thick legal book from the stack on his table. "Section 45 of the Landlord-Tenant Act," he began, his voice booming with mock authority, "clearly states that a landlord has the right to issue an eviction notice if the tenant has failed to meet payment obligations for 2 consecutive months. Now, Mr. Carter, are you denying that your mother was late on rent?" The room held its breath as all eyes turned to Jordan. He paused for a moment, his mind racing to process the question. He recognized Moore's tactic immediately. Overload him with irrelevant legal jargon and push him to admit something that could weaken his case. Jordan inhaled deeply, forcing himself to remain calm. He met Moore's piercing gaze with his own steady stare and responded, his voice firm. "No, Mr. Moore," he began. "I'm not here to deny that payments were delayed, but what I am here to prove is that this eviction notice," he picked up the document and held it up for the courtroom to see, "was issued fraudulently. The signature at the bottom belongs to a notary who retired 2 years before this notice was dated. That makes it invalid, regardless of payment status." A ripple of murmurs spread through the gallery, some spectators leaning forward to get a better look at the document Jordan held. Franklin Moore's confident smile wavered for the briefest moment. His eyes darted down to the document before flicking back to Jordan, a flicker of doubt betraying him. He recovered quickly, clearing his throat and flipping to another page in his book. "Ah, but Section 52 of the same Act," Moore said, his tone sharper now, "states that procedural errors such as clerical mistakes do not prevent a landlord from proceeding with an eviction if the tenant has failed to meet their financial obligations." Jordan didn't miss a beat. He glanced at the judge, then back at Moore. "That's correct," he said, his voice steady, "but only if the tenant has been provided a valid notice beforehand." Jordan pointed to the document in his hand. "This notice is fraudulent. The law is clear. Invalid documents render the entire eviction process void. Surely a seasoned lawyer like yourself would know that." For a brief moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Moore's facade of confidence cracked again, this time more visibly. His jaw tightened, and he glanced down at his notes, flipping through the pages with an air of frustration. A murmur of approval spread through the gallery, heads nodding in agreement, whispers of admiration filling the air. Even Judge Reynolds, who had been leaning back with an air of detachment, sat forward slightly in his chair. His sharp gaze fixed on Jordan, a flicker of curiosity and respect in his eyes. Moore cleared his throat again, straightening his posture as he spoke. "Well, Mr. Carter," he said, forcing a tight smile, "you certainly are thorough, but this case is far from over." With that, he returned to his seat, his expression a mixture of frustration and grudging respect. Jordan exhaled quietly, his grip tightening around his binder. The first challenge had been met, but he knew the battle was just beginning. The courtroom was silent, save for the faint shuffle of papers and the soft hum of the overhead lights. Jordan Carter stood behind the defense table, his binder open before him. He took a deep breath, gripping the edges of the table to steady himself. This was the moment he had prepared for, the chance to turn the tide. "Your Honor," Jordan began, his voice steady and measured, "this is the eviction notice issued to my mother by the landlord. On the surface, it may appear valid, but there's a critical issue with this document." He stepped forward, holding up the paper for the judge and the gallery to see. At the bottom of the notice is a notarized signature from Martha Allen. However, Martha Allen retired as a notary public 2 years before this document was issued. This isn't just a mistake, it's deliberate fraud. A murmur spread through the gallery as Jordan's words sank in. He continued, unshaken by the growing tension in the room. Under state law, any eviction notice based on a fraudulent signature is invalid. Without a valid notice, the entire eviction process becomes unlawful. Judge Reynolds leaned slightly forward, his expression sharp as he observed the document now handed to the court clerk for inspection. Jordan reached back into his binder and produced another document. "This," he said, holding it up, "is an official record of Martha Allen's notary certification, clearly showing her retirement date, May 2 years prior to the date on this eviction notice. Additionally, I've included her state-filed retirement paperwork to confirm the authenticity of this evidence." Franklin Moore, seated at the landlord's table, shifted uncomfortably. His usual confident smirk faltered as his eyes flicked between Jordan and the document now being examined by the court clerk. "Your Honor," Moore interjected, his voice tinged with frustration, "this is an outrageous claim. How does this child even have access to such information?" Jordan turned toward Moore, his eyes steady and his tone calm. "I did my research, Mr. Moore. The law is accessible to anyone who is willing to study it." Moore's jaw tightened as he quickly flipped through his notes, searching for a counter-argument. "Even if this claim were true," he said, his voice rising slightly, "the fact remains that the tenant failed to meet their financial obligations. The notice is secondary, too." Jordan didn't wait for Moore to finish. "The law doesn't see it that way, Mr. Moore," he said firmly. "State law explicitly requires a valid notice before any eviction proceedings can begin. A fraudulent document voids the process entirely. Surely, as a seasoned lawyer, you're familiar with this principle." The room fell silent. The gallery, once filled with whispers and subdued chuckles, now sat in quiet anticipation. Even Judge Reynolds appeared intrigued, his eyes narrowing as he examined the evidence before him. "Mr. Carter," the judge said finally, his voice measured but firm, "these are serious accusations. If this evidence is verified, it could fundamentally alter the course of this case. The court will take a brief recess to authenticate the documents." With a sharp rap of his gavel, Judge Reynolds stood and exited the courtroom. Jordan exhaled quietly, his shoulders relaxing slightly as the tension in the room shifted. He glanced back at his mother, who sat a few rows behind him. Angela's eyes glistened with pride as she gave him a small nod, her silent encouragement reminding him of why he had come this far. The courtroom reconvened after the recess, the tension in the air thicker than before. Judge Reynolds returned to the bench, his expression unreadable as he adjusted his glasses and sifted through the documents submitted by Jordan. After a moment of silence, he looked up and fixed his sharp gaze on the teenager standing at the defense table. "Mr. Carter," the judge began, his tone even but firm, "the evidence you've presented is compelling, but as you surely understand, presenting evidence is only part of the process. The law is complex, and interpreting it correctly is crucial. I have some questions to ensure that you fully grasp the implications of your claims." Jordan nodded, his face calm but focused. "I understand, Your Honor. Please, go ahead." The judge leaned forward slightly, his fingers laced together. "Let's start with this. You've claimed that the eviction notice is invalid due to fraud. Under what statute or precedent are you basing this argument?" Without missing a beat, Jordan replied, "Your Honor, I'm basing my argument on Section 58 of the State Tenant Protection Act, which explicitly states that eviction notices must be signed by a certified notary at the time of issuance. Any notice issued with an invalid or fraudulent signature is rendered void, as reinforced by the precedent set in State v. Harper 2008. Judge Reynolds raised an eyebrow, seemingly impressed. And what about the landlord's claim that procedural errors don't invalidate an eviction if the tenant has failed to meet payment obligations? How do you reconcile that with your argument? Jordan took a brief moment, ensuring his words were precise. Your Honor, that argument is addressed in Franklin v. Rhodes, 2011, where the court ruled that while tenants are obligated to pay rent, landlords are equally obligated to adhere to proper legal procedures. The ruling stated that failure to issue a valid notice is a procedural flaw that cannot be overlooked, regardless of payment status. The judge's gaze narrowed. Are you aware, Mr. Carter, that your argument, if upheld, could set a precedent that fundamentally alters landlord-tenant disputes statewide? How do you propose addressing the potential backlash or misuse of such a ruling? Jordan straightened slightly, his voice firm but respectful. Your Honor, I believe the law must apply equally to all. If my argument sets a precedent, it's because the current system allows loopholes that harm people like my family, those without the resources to fight back. If landlords must follow the law, then no one, no matter how powerful, should be above it. Judge Reynolds leaned back, tapping his pen against the desk. After a long pause, he finally spoke. Mr. Carter, I've seen seasoned attorneys stumble over questions like these. But you, Mr. Carter, have shown a level of preparation and understanding that rivals professionals in this courtroom. It's remarkable, truly. The room remained silent, the weight of the judge's words settling over everyone. The courtroom was utterly silent as Judge Reynolds leaned back in his chair, his pen tapping lightly against the desk. For the first time since the trial began, his piercing gaze softened, and his expression shifted from skepticism to something that looked like admiration. He adjusted his glasses, studying Jordan Carter as though seeing him in a new light. Mr. Carter, the judge began, his voice steady and clear, you've presented your arguments with clarity, precision, and an understanding of the law that far exceeds my expectations. I'll admit, when you first walked into this courtroom, I underestimated you. But today, you've reminded me of a fundamental truth. Justice doesn't discriminate, not by age, race, or background. It's driven by truth and courage, and you have shown both. The words hung in the air, resonating deeply throughout the room. The gallery, once filled with murmurs of doubt and the occasional chuckle, was now eerily quiet. Heads began to nod. A man seated in the second row, who had laughed earlier, leaned forward slightly, his expression serious. Maybe I misjudged him, he whispered to his neighbor. Nearby, an elderly woman dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, her voice just audible. That boy has more integrity than most grown men I've ever met, she murmured. The ripple of approval grew stronger, turning into hushed whispers of agreement. Those who had once dismissed Jordan now sat in quiet awe, reflecting on the remarkable transformation they had witnessed. Even Franklin Moore, the landlord's once confident attorney, sat stiffly in his chair. His hands were clenched tightly together, his expression betraying a mix of frustration and reluctant respect. He glanced away, avoiding the gazes of those around him. Jordan stood at the defense table, his fingers resting lightly on the edge of his binder. The weight of the room's judgment no longer felt oppressive. It felt validating. For months, he had fought against doubts, assumptions, and obstacles, and now he was finally being seen for what he truly was: capable, determined, and deserving of respect. He glanced over his shoulder at his mother. Angela sat quietly, her hands clasped together tightly, tears shimmering in her eyes. She gave him a small nod, her expression full of pride and relief. Her silent support filled him with a renewed sense of purpose. Judge Reynolds leaned forward, his eyes fixed on Jordan. You've taught us all something today, Mr. Carter, he said solemnly. Not just about the law, but about resilience and integrity. Your work here is remarkable, and I hope this is only the beginning of your journey. Jordan met the judge's gaze, his voice steady but humble. Thank you, Your Honor. I'll carry this lesson with me. The judge's lips curved into a faint smile. You've earned this victory, son, and I suspect you'll earn many more in the future. Jordan stood silently, his heart pounding, as Judge Reynolds lifted his gavel and looked out over the courtroom. The court rules in favor of the defendant, Angela Carter, he announced clearly. The eviction notice is hereby declared invalid. The plaintiff is ordered to compensate the Carter family for wrongful eviction and emotional distress. The courtroom was still for a moment before quiet murmurs spread, followed by scattered applause. Angela gasped, covering her face with her hands as tears streamed down her cheeks. She rose from her seat and rushed to Jordan, throwing her arms around him tightly. "You did it," she whispered through her tears, her voice trembling with emotion. "You really did it. You're my pride, my hope, my everything." Jordan hugged her back, his own eyes glistening but steady. "We did it, Mom," he replied softly. "This victory is ours." As the courtroom began to empty, Judge Reynolds stepped down from the bench and approached Jordan and Angela. His expression was thoughtful, a mix of humility and admiration. "Mr. Carter," he said, extending a hand, "I owe you an apology." Jordan blinked in surprise, but shook the judge's hand firmly. "When you first walked into this courtroom, I assumed you didn't belong here," Reynolds continued, his voice steady but tinged with regret. "I let my own assumptions and biases cloud my judgment. But today you've shown me that justice doesn't care about age, race, or background. It cares about truth and courage, and you've displayed both in remarkable ways." Jordan nodded, his voice quiet but firm. "Thank you, Your Honor. That means a lot to me." Reynolds smiled faintly and placed a hand on Jordan's shoulder. "You have a rare gift, son. If you're serious about pursuing law, I'd be honored to mentor you. This field needs people like you." Angela placed a hand over her heart, her expression a mix of pride and gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. As Jordan and Angela stepped out of the courthouse, the warm midday sun bathed them in its glow. The weight of the trial lifted, replaced by a sense of hope and possibility. Jordan paused at the top of the steps, his eyes drawn to the clear blue sky above. "One day I'll come back," he murmured, his voice low but filled with determination. "Not as a defendant, but as a lawyer. I'll fight for people like us." Angela turned to him, her smile radiant despite her tear-streaked face. "You'll do it, Jordan," she said with quiet certainty. "I know you will." Together, they walked home, their steps lighter than they had been in months. The modest house they had fought so hard to protect stood waiting for them, its doors swinging open to welcome them back. Jordan glanced over his shoulder one last time at the courthouse in the distance, his face calm but resolute. His journey had only just begun. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey of resilience, hope, and justice. If Jordan's story inspired you as much as it inspired us, don't keep it to yourself. Like this video to show your support, share this story with your friends and family because you never know whose day it might brighten. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss another powerful story like this one. Your support means the world to us. Every like, share, and subscription gives our team the motivation to keep creating meaningful content that touches hearts and inspires change. Thank you for being part of our community, and we'll see you in the next story.